In this video, we will be installing a new ACT Performance street clutch and flywheel. Please know that we try and be as thorough as possible with our videos. However, as the removal and installation of the clutch and flywheel on this vehicle is more complex than many others we have done, there might be some items we may not have shown during the disassembly and reassembly process. This may include such items as various electrical connectors, bolts, bracketry, and so on. This video is intended to provide the basics on how to replace the clutch and flywheel, and it is no way intended to replace a factory service manual. Remove the engine cover by pulling up until the rubber mounts release from the pins. Unscrew the nuts, release the lock at the filter housing, and remove the air intake port. Unfasten the screws for the upper section of the filter housing. Detach the rubber wiring retainer from the housing, unlock and remove the connector for the airflow sensor, loosen the clamp, and then remove the upper section of the filter housing. Unfasten the hardware and then pull straight up to free the lower section of the filter housing from the rubber mounts. Then remove the lower section of the filter housing from the vehicle. Remove the screws, partially detach the rubber seal, and then remove the battery cover. Loosen and remove the negative cable from the battery. Unfasten the hardware, remove the mounting for the rubber seal, and then remove the front of the battery box. Loosen and remove the positive cable from the battery. Unbolt and remove the battery hold down. Remove the vent hose and then remove the battery from the vehicle. Unfasten the hardware, disconnect the harness, and remove the battery tray. Disengage the selector lever cables from the shift tower by using an open-end wrench and leveraging them off the ball joints. Remove the selector lever cables from the bracket and then move them up and out of the way. Please note that we only show one in the video, but there are two. Unbolt the ground wire from the transmission housing. Before lifting the vehicle in the air, to make it easier on us, we loosened the bolts for the upper transmission mount, but did not remove them. Lift the vehicle and unbolt and remove both driver and passenger side wheel and tire assemblies. Remove the hardware and then remove the underbody panel. Remove the transmission drain plug and allow the transmission oil to flow into a suitable container. Clean and install the drain plug, then tighten it to 48 foot-pounds. Remove the wiring from the starter. Unbolt and remove the starter. On the driver's side, remove the nut and bolt securing the lower ball joint. On the passenger side, remove the nut and bolt securing the lower ball joint. On the driver's side, pry the control arm down to remove the ball joint from the knuckle. On the passenger side, pry the control arm down to remove the ball joint from the knuckle. Unbolt the slave cylinder and unbolt the bracket securing the hydraulic line at the back of the transmission. Then move the slave cylinder down and out of the way. Use a cable tie or something to secure it so it does not hang down. On the driver's side, remove the nut from the steering arm ball joint and then remove the ball joint from the knuckle assembly. Unfasten and remove the axle nut. Swing the knuckle out, remove the axle from the hub assembly, disengage the axle from the transmission, and remove it from the vehicle. On the passenger side, remove the nut from the steering arm ball joint and then remove the ball joint from the knuckle assembly. Unfasten the axle carrier from the engine. Disengage the axle from the transmission, then shift it as far from the transmission as you can. Unfasten the driver's side inner fender liner enough so that you can have good access to the bumper impact bracket, crossbar, and transmission. We secured it out of the way using a bungee cord. You can completely remove the inner fender liner if preferred. Unfasten the passenger side inner fender liner enough so that you can have good access for the bumper impact bracket and crossbar. We secured it out of the way using a bungee cord. You can completely remove the inner fender liner if preferred. Remove the left and right locking pins and then remove the locks from the crossbar. Unbolt the bumper impact bracket from the front subframe. Remove the cable clips and wiring from the passenger side of the bumper impact bracket. Unfasten the remaining hardware securing the bumper impact bracket as well as the washer fluid reservoir bracket on the passenger side. With all the hardware removed, remove the bumper impact bracket and crossbar assembly. At the front of the transmission, disconnect the gear sensor and disengage the wiring from the transmission. Remove the bolt, unplug the sensor, and then remove the air inlet duct. Support the engine and remove the bell housing bolts. Unbolt the upper mount from the transmission. Making sure everything has been disconnected or removed from the transmission, carefully disengage the transmission from the engine and remove it from the vehicle. Unbolt the pressure plate and remove the old pressure plate and disc. Unbolt and remove the old flywheel. Remove the magnet wheel that was behind the flywheel and set it aside. Do not drop or damage it. Inspect the rear main seal for leaks and replace it if needed. Remove the release lever, release bearing, and pivot ball from the transmission. Remove the pivot ball from the fork if you are reusing it. It is recommended by both Mini and ACT to replace the pivot ball with a new one, which is not included in our kits. Remove the guide tube and make sure to clean the input shaft of any dirt, grease, or grime. Replace the guide tube with a new one included in your kit. Tighten the hardware to 6 foot-pounds. Lightly coat the guide tube with a thin layer of Ceram lube included in your kit and lube the input shaft splines. Slide the disc onto the input shaft and work the lube into the splines. Then remove the disc and wipe off any excess lube to prevent contamination of the clutch disc. Lightly coat the inside of the release bearing with a thin layer of the Ceram lube and place a small amount of lube into the pivot ball pocket. With the pivot ball installed into the transmission, and if not already done, install the release bearing onto the fork. Then install the release module assembly onto the transmission, making sure the clip engages the pivot ball correctly. Test the assembly for smooth and proper operation. Place a small amount of thread locking compound on the new flywheel attachment bolts included with your new flywheel. Making sure the magnet wheel is installed in place, put the flywheel up in position and install the bolts until they are snug. Using a ring gear tool to keep the flywheel from turning, torque the bolts to 88 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Not shown in the video, be sure to clean the flywheel friction surface area with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Place the disc in position on the flywheel, making sure the marking is facing the correct direction, and hold it in place with the alignment tool. Before installing the pressure plate, make sure to clean the friction surface area with a non-petroleum based cleaner. Set the pressure plate in position over the disc and install the new pressure plate attachment bolts included in your kit. Tighten the bolts in a star pattern until snug. At this point, you can remove the alignment tool and torque the bolts to 26 foot-pounds, also in a star pattern. Lift the transmission back into place and support it with a jack. Install the lower bell housing bolts securely to keep the transmission in place. Place a small amount of lube onto the tip of the slave cylinder and then install the slave cylinder, slowly compressing the plunger until it's in place. Install and tighten the hardware to 14 foot-pounds. Install the bracket at the rear of the transmission and secure the hydraulic line back into the bracket if it was removed. Install the bolts for the upper transmission mount and tighten them to 29 foot-pounds plus an additional 90 degrees. You can now remove the support for the engine. On the passenger side, install the axle into the transmission. Reinstall the axle carrier to the engine and tighten the hardware to 28 foot-pounds. Install the remaining bell housing bolts and tighten them all to 48 foot-pounds. Move the duct back into position at the rear of the engine and tighten the bolts for both the duct and the brackets. At the front of the transmission, reconnect the gear sensor and secure the wiring to the transmission. Set the starter back into position. Install and tighten the hardware to 14 foot-pounds. Then install the wiring to the starter. Place the air inlet duct in position. Install and tighten the hardware and then connect the plug into the sensor. On the driver's side, install the axle into the transmission and then into the hub assembly. Install the axle bolt, but do not tighten it yet. Fit the lower control arm ball joint back into the knuckle assembly and install the nut and bolt. Place the steering arm ball joint back onto the knuckle assembly and install the nut. Tighten the steering arm ball joint nut to 129 foot-pounds. Tighten the lower control arm ball joint bolt to 44 foot-pounds while holding the nut still. Install any sensor wiring back into the brackets if removed. On the passenger side, fit the lower control arm ball joint back into the knuckle assembly and install the nut and bolt. Tighten the lower control arm ball joint bolt to 44 foot-pounds while holding the nut still. Place the steering arm ball joint back onto the knuckle assembly and tighten the nut to 129 foot-pounds. Place the bumper impact bracket and crossbar assembly up into position, making sure the intercooler is positioned correctly into the rubber isolators. Making sure the bolt holes are lined up for the bumper impact bracket to the front subframe, install the bolts and tighten them to 73 foot-pounds. Install the left and right locks and locking pins into the crossbar. Install the bolts at the front of the bumper impact bracket and tighten them to 9 foot-pounds. Install the cable clips and wiring back onto the bumper impact bracket. On the driver's side, place the inner fender liner back in place and install the hardware. On the passenger side, place the washer fluid reservoir bracket in place and install and tighten the hardware to 8 foot-pounds. Remove the transmission fill plug and fill the transmission with the vehicle manufacturer's type and amount of fluid. Install the fill plug and tighten it to 48 foot-pounds. On the passenger side, place the inner fender liner back into place and install the hardware. Place the underbody panel in position, install and tighten the hardware. Install the selector lever cables into the brackets and connect them to the shift tower. Position the ground wire onto the transmission housing and install and tighten the bolt. Place the battery tray in position, install and tighten the hardware, and reconnect the harness. Set the battery in place and install and tighten the positive cable. Install the battery hold down and tighten the bolt. Reconnect and tighten the negative battery cable. Install the vent hose onto the battery. Install the front of the battery box and tighten the hardware. Set the mounting for the rubber seal in place and install the hardware. Fit the lower section of the filter housing in position, making sure the pins at the bottom seat completely in the mounts. Install and tighten the hardware. Install the upper section of the filter housing and tighten the hardware. Make sure the inlet pipe is in position and tighten the clamp. Install the connector for the airflow sensor and then reattach the rubber retainer to the housing as well as any wiring harnesses into their stays. Place the air intake port in place, engaging the lock at the filter housing, and install and tighten the nuts. Place the battery cover in position, install and tighten the screws, then attach the rubber seal. Install the engine cover, making sure the rubber mounts all secure onto the pins. Install the passenger side tire and wheel assembly and tighten the lug bolts until they are snug. With the center cap removed from the wheel, install the driver's side tire and wheel assembly and tighten the lug bolts until they are snug. With the wheels on the ground just enough that they do not turn, tighten the axle bolt to 154 foot-pounds plus an additional 90 degrees. Not shown in the video, install the center cap. Tighten the lug bolts on both driver and passenger side to 103 foot-pounds in a crosswise sequence. Before starting the vehicle, check to make sure everything has been reinstalled and connected. For more information on our products and the parts featured in this video, please visit our website in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.